organism is the western spadefoot toad, or known by its scientific name, the Spea hammondi. The taxonomy consists of the kingdom, which is Animalia, the phylum, which is Chordata, the class, which is Amphibia, the order, which is Anura, the family, which is Scaphiopodidae, the genus, which is Spea, and the species, which is Spea hammondi. Now for the kingdom tree, here we have at the very bottom the cell membrane. Following it is the archaea, and bacteria branches off because it is characterized by the presence of peptidoglycan. And next we have the presence of the nucleus, which is shown in Protista. Following that we have multicellular, and after that is the fungi, characterized by the chitin. And towards the end of the kingdom tree we have the plantae, which branches off as it is characterized by a cellular wall. And following that we have consumers, which are characterized by being mouth eaters, which branches into Animalia, which is where the spadefoot toad falls into. And here's the phylum tree. At the very bottom we have the vertebrae, and following that we have the agnatha, which is jawless fish. After that we have the introduction of jaws, and which brings us to the chondriothides, which is the cartilage fish. Following that we have the derived characteristic of lungs, which brings us to the osteothides, or bony fish. After that we have the introduction of limbs, which brings us to amphibia, which is where the spadefoot toad is found. Following that we have the introduction of amnion, which characterizes reptilia. And here we see that aves, or birds, branch off of reptilia because of the presence of feathers. And following that we have the introduction of mammary glands, or hair, which then characterizes mammalia, or mammals, at the end of the phylum tree. Now the western spadefoot toad has multiple adaptations for its arid environment in California and northern Mexico. One of these includes cat-like eyes, which means that the pupils are vertically elliptical during the daytime, and then at night they expand and show a round iris. And then we have the wedge-shaped glossy black spade, which is shown here by this image, on each hind foot. And that's used primarily for digging in the loose soil that's on the ground in the desert, arid-like areas of California and Mexico. Now, when the toads mate, they do it in water, or shallow water, in pools, and the eggs are attached to the plant stems, submerged in the pools, and and this adaptation is made so that they can protect the eggs while keeping them in moisture, rather than on the arid terrestrial ground. These toads construct and occupy their own burrows, and they do this to maintain the moisture and to stay away from the heat during the daytime. And also, as all toads have to maintain a lot of moisture on their skin, these toads have to bury themselves into the ground and obtain the moisture from the soil that surrounds them, because they're in such an arid environment. Another adaptation includes retaining urea to increase the osmotic pressure within their bodies. They also do this to maintain the moisture in this environment. And they spend the majority of their time burrowed under the soil, so their breeding season is characterized by the sound or vibration of rain falling. And this tells them that they need to go into the shallow ponds that are formed by the rain in order to start breeding. And for the most part, their above ground activity is nocturnal to avoid the heat from the daylight. And to deter any predators, they secrete a toxic secretion from the dermal glands, and it's characterized by a peanut butter smell. Here's a food web including the spadefoot toad, which is in the center. At the very bottom we have the producer grass, which is fed to insects, and the insects are fed to snakes and toads. Other worms and algae are also fed to the toads, and also planktonic organisms and aquatic larvae. including their very own larvae, not just those of other animals. And the bullfrog also eats aquatic larvae, and the bullfrog is then fed to the snake as well, and including the fish also fed to the snakes. And the hawk feeds on snakes, insects, bullfrog, and fish, and toads as well. Now, what distinguishes the western spadefoot toad from any other toad is that it lacks a cranial boss, which is a ridge between the eyes, which is visible here on these fossils. And another thing that characterizes them is that their upper mandible is beaked and their lower mandible is notched. Now, this image here is taken from a book by W.W. Tanner in 1989, and the western spadefoot toad was actually first discovered in 1875 in California. Now, the spadefoot toad's habitat includes grasses where there's sparse vegetation, and the soil has to be loose or sandy so that the toads can burrow underground to stay away from the heat and retain their moisture. And of course, the environment has to include rain pools where they can breed, and there can't be any presence of bullfrogs or fish or crayfish because they primarily eat the larvae of the spadefoot toads. However, environments can include mixed woodlands, grasslands, coastal sage scrub, lowlands, river floodplains, mountains, and foothills, and there has to be fresh water. Although it is rare, these toads can live for a few years in orchards and vineyard habitats, which is very common in California. And of course, to satisfy their food, the environment needs to have an abundance of insects, worms, planktonic organisms, and algae, as well as the aquatic larvae of amphibians, including their own. Now, the western spadefoot toad is primarily found in California, in the Central Valley and the bordering foothills of California, and along the coastal ranges south of San Francisco Bay. And they can also be found, shown by this image here, in the northwestern Baja California, Mexico.